All rise, veuve lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated for voix va.
L'audience est ouverte.
Presiding Judge, the proceedings are hereby opened. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Court officer, could you announce the case, please?
Your Honors, this is the situation in the Republic of Mali in the case of the prosecutor versus Al-Hassan Abdul Aziz Mohammed Mahmoud. Case reference ICC 01-12-0118, and for the record, we are in open session.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Greffière.
Presiding Judge, thank you very much, Court officer.
Je souhaite la bienvenue à tous ceux
I would
qui
like
sont
to
présents
welcome
dans cette
all
salle
those who are
d'audience,
present in the courtroom,
naturellement à Monsieur Al-Hassan,
and of course Mr. Al-Hassan.
ainsi qu'à toutes les personnes qui nous suivent depuis
And I would also like to welcome all those who are attending in the public gallery
qui nous suivent au loin.
and those who are following these proceedings remotely.
Comme d'habitude, avant de poursuivre,
Now, as usual,
je vais demander
before going any further, I'm going to invite the parties and the participants to introduce themselves. And I shall start, of course, with the Office of the Prosecutor.
adjoint,
I see the Deputy Prosecutor is present. Good morning.
veuillez présenter les membres de votre équipe.
Would you like to introduce the members of your team and yourself for the record? Ms. Vinyang. Thank you, Your Honour. Good morning, Your Honour. The Office of the Prosecutor today is represented by Yanogo Benwaenge, who is a visiting professional, Caroline Leroy, who is an assistant who is responsible for this case, Sandra Schouters, who is senior legal counsel, Yamwai Yamaguchi, Marie-Jeanne Sardacci, Mr. Lucio Garcia, Mr. Gilles Dutertre, who is well known to you, Your Honour, and myself, Mame Nyang, Deputy Prosecutor. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le procureur. Au nom de la
Presiding
Chambre,
Judge, thank you very much.
je vous remercie encore une fois et je salue votre
Mr.
présence.
Prosecutor, thank you for that, and thank you for
Je me tourne maintenant
being in
vers
attendance today with your team. I would now turn to the defense.
Maître Taylor.
I see Ms. Taylor is present. Ms. Taylor, please introduce yourself and your team.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to everyone in and around the courtroom. The defense for Mr. Al-Hassan is represented today, turning to my left. We have Dr. Felicity Gary, we have Maître Alke Pradhan, we have Maître Melissa Boyou-Lucier, Maître Mohamed Youssef, Maître Leila Abid, Professor Mohamed Badar, Mr. Maulud Al-Ansari, Maître Kelsey Ryan, and Ms. Brianna Dyer. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all past and present members of the defense who are following this hearing from around the courtroom and from afar. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Taylor.
Presiding Judge.
Au nom de la Chambre,
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
je vous salue
Once again, good morning to you
à votre équipe qui aujourd'hui.
on behalf of the Chamber, and I would like to
Alors, enfin, je me tourne
welcome
vers
your
le
full
représentant
team.
de vos victimes.
I turn now to the legal representatives of victims. I'm not sure who will be introducing the team. Is it Mr. Nsita? Mr. Nsita. Yes, it is indeed. Good morning, Your Honours. Good morning to all. The victims are represented today by Ms. Priska Bieke Dipanga, Mr. Andrés Felipe Morales, Ms. Julie Goffin, my colleague Mayombo Kasongo, and from the field in attendance are Mr. Baiga Boubacar, who is our assistant in the field, and I believe that my colleague Seydou Doumbia and my colleague Janine Kabinga shall also be attending in due course. Presiding Judge, thank you very much, Mr. Sita. So once again, good morning to you and to your team present in the room and also in attendance remotely. I see that Mr. Maiga is here, and we expect your colleague Seydou Doumbia also to join us without further delay. Now today and the following 2 days are 2 very important days for us, because today we will be hearing the closing arguments of the parties and of the participants. I hope that the parties and participants will take the opportunity to focus on the most important points, given that the Chamber has already received your written submissions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to the Deputy Prosecutor to hear the closing arguments of the Office of the Prosecutor. So please take your time, Mr. Nyang, to get yourself set up.
Merci encore.
Thank you once again, Mr. President, Your Honors. I would like to start by correcting a small omission when it comes to our team that is present. Madam Diane Looping, whom you are fully familiar with because she was part of the trial. I forgot to mention her a short while ago. She will be joining the team shortly. And I think it's important to underscore this, mindful of the role she played in this trial. The presiding judge, thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor. That is obvious, and it will figure on the record. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor and the opportunity to address the court, to address the President and Your Honors. Clearly, I have with me today the trial lawyers who have handled this case from the beginning and will be providing you with the substance of our closing arguments. Mr. Gilles Duterte will provide you with a summary as instructed, and I want to underscore that we intend to use the time that you have graciously afforded us, but maybe not all of it, because we are aware that you already have our final brief with you. That having been said, Mr. President, Your Honors, I really appreciate the opportunity to avail myself of this solemn opportunity to, first of all, thank a number of persons. In this regard, I am thinking about the Malian authorities who, right from the beginning of this trial, provided a lot of assistance to the OTP with collecting evidence and other types of assistance. I also want to include all the other states which provided a lot of help in facilitating our mandate. I also, in that regard, want to recognize the United Nations and civil society organizations which contributed immensely to our work throughout the duration of this trial, including the preparatory phase thereof. Now, turning to the main point of today's hearing, I would like to briefly underscore at least one thing. And what is this thing? You see, the trial we are in today, allow me to solemnly state and repeat that this is not a trial about religion. Religion is not on trial here. Islam is not on trial here. It is true, however, that religion can be used, any kind of religion can be used as the ideological basis and a justification for perpetrating mass crimes. Now, when such is the case, whereby religion is used for such causes, religion cannot and should not become a shield that will be an obstacle in the way of prosecutions and sanctions. That is what we are dealing with here today. We are dealing with a blatant case of persecution where two armed groups, Ansar Din and Akim, impose on the people of Timbuktu through force, violence, and threats the rules and prohibitions that those people had never experienced before. So, you will hear our senior trial lawyer, Duterte, address you on the important role played by the accused, Al-Hassan, within the Islamic police, and the role that this organ played in the persecution of the peoples of Timbuktu. Among other things, we will be looking at crimes and forced marriages which were committed against women and girls in Timbuktu, public flogging of persons who did not obey the new rules, which were new prohibitions introduced by Ansar Din and Akim. The senior trial lawyer, Duterte, will also provide you with significant excerpts of OTP witnesses and will show you some written and signed documents in the hand of Al-Hassan himself. He will show you videos of Police Commissioner Al-Hassan fully involved in the commission of crimes. In a nutshell, Your Honor, after over a period of 186 hearing days, the OTP called 71 witnesses, of whom 52 at least were viva voce. Some 12,397 documents were produced into evidence, and the globality of the proof or the evidence points to the guilt of the accused in relation to the war crimes and crimes against humanity as charged, namely the crimes of torture, cruel treatment, and other inhumane acts and outrages upon personal dignity, mutilation, and convictions by an improperly constituted court, forced marriages as other inhuman acts, as well as other related crimes of rape and sexual slavery, as well as rapes in detention or custody, and then attacks on religious institutions, and then finally, the crime of persecution on religious and gender-based grounds. What I would like to underscore finally, Your Honor, is that the evidence sufficiently points to the fact that constraint and the state of necessity, which are claimed to be a defense, cannot prosper today in this case. What we are dealing with is a case of voluntary, should I even say, enthusiastic and jubilatory participation in a criminal activity shrouded in religion. Those are the few words I wanted to say by way of introduction before giving the floor to Mr. Jules Duterte, our senior trial lawyer. Thank you, sir.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor. The chamber is now ready to hear Mr. Duterte. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Please allow me 1 second to set up properly. Thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor, as well. The presiding judge, take your time, Mr. Duterte. Please proceed, Mr. Duterte. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me salute all my colleagues opposite in the courtroom and the public gallery, those abroad, especially in Mali. I want to reassure the chamber that I hope to be done within the second session, depending on the tempo of my delivery.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges,
Mr. President, Your Honors, on the 7th of November 2012, in Timbuktu, in the premises of the Islamic Police, which was created by Ansar Din and Akim to forcibly impose their ideological and religious visions. In fact, precisely in the governorate office, Hassan is sitting at a large wooden vineyard table. He looks relaxed while granting an interview. He's being questioned about the mission of the Islamic Police. This interview is recorded, and I would like to quote his words translated from Arabic into English. I quote,
we do have a lot of work. It involves patrols within the town and correcting objectionable acts, any type of reprehensible act which has been forbidden. We correct, such as drinking alcohol, smoking, and a woman adorning herself, and other such acts. In Timbuktu, only one hand has been chopped off, and only one murderer has been executed. And then 2 or 3 perpetrators have been flogged. Fin de citation.
end of quote.
Je vais passer maintenant
Allow me now
un court extrait de ses propos
to
en arabe,
show
l'exécution à mort,
a short
l'humiliation
excerpt
et la flagellation provisoire.
of his presentation in Arabic, which is item 56, 57, and 59 on the list that has been distributed. I do not need any translation because it depicts exactly what I have just spoken to previously.
في تيمبكتو تم قطع يد واحد فقط. تم قطع يد واحد وتم قتل قاتل واحد وتم جلد زونات 2 ولا 3 على ما أظن وتم جلد الخمارين.
Clairement, Monsieur le Président et Mesdames les juges,
Mr. President, Your Honors, clearly it is Al-Hassan whom we see in the image, witness P0655, an expert in voice identification, asserts that it is indeed Al-Hassan's voice that we hear. 4 things emerge from Al-Hassan's remarks: the targeting of the population and women, the trivialization of violence, subscription to violence, and an acknowledgement of his involvement in the enforcement and implementation of the new rules imposed by Ansardine and ACME. A little further into the video, Al-Hassan concludes his remarks by laughing with his interlocutor. Clearly, he is unapologetic and strongly adheres to the plan of Ansardine and Akim to establish their power and control over the population and to impose their ideological and religious visions, especially on women. But let us back up a little bit, Your Honors. Akim has been present in Northern Army for several years, working to integrate into the population while waiting for its time to come. As for Ansardine, it was created by the end of 2011 by Iyad Akhali, who is a member of Akim. During one of his sermons recorded in 2012, he proclaimed the following, and I quote,
nous partageons tout.
"We share everything with Al-Qaeda. We share a common religion. We share the same approach. We share a common doctrine. We share everything. Doctrine, combat, and faith." End of quote. In fact, Ansardine is a proxy of Akim, a smoke screen with a virgin past that portrays a virgin, so to speak, Malian origin that would thereby be more acceptable to the people. History offered these groups the opportunity of a lightning offensive. Ansardine, Akim, and other armed groups such as Mujao and Minla took control of northern Mali in less than 3 months. When Colonel Gaddafi fell in 2011, this reshuffled the cards, so to speak, in the Sahel, and the return of many Tuareg fighters from Libya to Mali also caused a massive influx of weapons into Mali. Mr. President, Your Honor, in other words, this means an influx of seasoned men and material resources.
Une première attaque est menée par le MNLA le 17 janvier 2012.
The first MNLA attack was carried out on the 17th of January 2012 against the Malian army camp located in Menaka. But the shock action, so to speak, the one that will shake the Malian army, was the attack of the 18th of January 2012 against the Aguelok camp in the north of the country, not far from the Algerian border. Ansardine and Akim besieged this camp for 7 long days. Iyad Aghali led the operations on the ground. Malian soldiers put up a strong resistance. But on January 24, 2012, 1 week after, they ran out of ammunition.
Une centaine de soldats maliens
So the camp fell, and 100 or so Malian soldiers were killed, including 20 to 30 prisoners of war who were executed in cold blood by Ansar Dine and Hakim. Captain Sekou Traoré, who led the resistance within the camp, was among the assassinated prisoners. The message conveyed by these murderers or these murders was unambiguous. The Malian army was shaken. The advance of Hakim and Ansar Dine, as well as Mujao, seemed inevitable. The situation in Bamako was feverish, and on 21 March 2012, President Amadou Toumani Touré was overthrown by a coup d'etat. This, in fact, precipitated the advance of the armed groups, particularly in northern Mali. And that's how Kidal fell on March 30, 2012. Iyad Akhali and Abu Zaid of Hakim were in charge of the maneuvers on the ground. Gao fell on the 31st of March 2012 into the hands of Mujao. They beheaded a Malian lieutenant, and his head hanging in public caused panic to grow among the ranks of the Malian army. No surprise when it comes to Timbuktu. The Malian soldiers preferred to accept the ultimatum imposed on them. They left the city for Diabali in the south of the country. On 1 April 2012, a militia called the Arab Militia and then the MNLA entered Timbuktu one after the other. They engaged in looting, while Ansar Dine and Hakim were on standby nearby. Now, contrary to the claims of the defense, Mr. President, Your Honors, Ansar Dine and Hakim did not come to Timbuktu to save the population from disorder and looting. Their lone purpose was to take over power in Mali. And they did not hide it. They are the ones who routed the Malian army. And they were, in fact, determined to capture the city of 333 saints, a major and prestigious city in West Africa. A cosmopolitan city comprising a mix of communities, cultures, and religions, the majority of whom were Muslim believers. A city where people were free to practice their religion as they wished. A city where, in one word, they could exercise their fundamental rights and traditions in accordance with the secular Malian constitution. The goal of Ansar Dine and Hakim was to impose their power and control on the people and to impose their own ideological and religious vision on all aspects, And I repeat, all aspects of life in society, especially regarding women. It did so, and it did not matter whatever resources needed to be allocated for that purpose. That is how, shortly thereafter, in the afternoon of April 1, or on or around the 2nd of April 2012, the armed groups Ansar Dine and Hakim entered the city. Mr. President, Your Honors, with your leave, let me show you some of the images which we looked at during this trial, which go to illustrate the entrance of Ansar Dine and Hakim into Timbuktu with their weapons and what have you. I'll show you item number 33 and 44, which show how the Ansar Dine convoy entered the city, passing in front of the mosques with their armored vehicles.
Vous voyez cette première image?
As you can see on the first image, there is an Hakim flag on the first vehicle, while the convoy follows. I want to zoom in and show you another image.
Et on se rend compte effectivement
And as you can see, this is the kind of equipment that Ansar Dine and Hakim had, particularly an armored vehicle that was captured in a previous attack in a military camp in northern Mali. This is a picture of their entrance into Timbuktu, which heralds what would happen subsequently. You see, when I say this is how they entered the city, who am I talking about? Exactly. Well, there is Iyad Aghali and his acolytes. Abu Zaid, Emir of the Tariq Ibn Ziyad battalion, and that battalion. There is Hayya Abu al-Haman, Emir of the Al-Furqan battalion, and the said battalion. There is also Abu Talha, a prominent member of the Al-Furqan battalion, as well as Sanda Ud Boumama, a long-time member of Hakim, who served as spokesperson, among others. At that time, Mr. President, Your Honors, the Arab militia, which I mentioned earlier, had in fact already withdrawn on its own. Ansar Dine and Hakim chased out MNLA, which withdrew to the airport located a few kilometers from the city. Ansar Dine and Hakim then occupied the city of Timbuktu for 10 endless months, until January 2013, when the Malian and French forces liberated the city. Mr. President, Your Honors, they had become the new masters of the city of 333 saints. They agreed that any decision or action to be taken would be announced on behalf of Ansar Dine And on this specific point, I refer you to witness P0004. The idea is to have them appear to be locals. It is in this spirit that Ansar Din and Hakim also quickly co-opted the services of native Timbuktu citizens, such as Huka Huka, Al-Mahdi, alias Abu Turab, Mohamed Musa, and Al-Hassan, the accused, who joined them and played a significant role in the brutal repression that befell Timbuktu and its inhabitants.
Dès le début, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges,
Mr. President, Your Honors, the tone was set right from the onset. Iyad Hadi took up residence at the military camp abandoned by the Malian army. About 20 Timbuktu inhabitants went there to meet him. Witness P0125 is one of them. This is what Iyad told them, and I quote, that he is now the leader, and that his group, Ansar Din, is in charge of the city, that they had come to establish Islam, and that anyone who lives in accordance or abides by what is said in the Quran will have no problem with him, but others will have problems with him and his group. End of quote.
c'est que
In fact, Iyad Ali considered the people of Timbuktu not to be true practicing Muslims. Although we are looking at the city of 333 saints, which played a significant role in the history of Islam in Africa. In one of his speeches delivered in May 2012, Iyad Aglavi says that he perceived the inhabitants of Timbuktu as unbelievers who needed, quote unquote, to learn their religion.
le témoin de la défense D0202 a renchéri. D202 a témoigné que les locaux, je cite, je vois que le transcript marque.
Sorry, Defense D0202 added
Le témoin de la défense
further,
D0202 a témoigné, je cite,
and I quote,
ouvrez les guillemets, que les Tombouctous
that
se disent musulmans,
the inhabitants of Timbuktu claim to be Muslims,
mais leur comportement
but their behavior reflected otherwise. End of quote.
Il précise, s'agissant des femmes, je cite,
He says further
corps d'une femme
regarding women, and I quote, the body of a woman cannot be shown except for the face and the hands. End of quote.
ça résume tout.
That sums it all up.
On voit les fondements
We see here
persécution religieuse,
the foundations of religious persecution
persécution contre les femmes,
and persecution against
va
women
s'exercer inlassablement.
that will unfailingly ensue in the following months.
Une avalanche, il n'y a pas d'autre mot,
An avalanche, and that's the only word possible, of new religious rules and prohibitions rained down on the inhabitants of Timbuktu affecting all aspects of their public and private lives.
Le témoin P0547 que vous
Witness
avez entendu
P0547,
déclare ainsi, ouvrez les
whom you
guillemets,
heard, stated as follows, and I quote,
après l'arrivée des islamistes,
"After the arrival of the Islamists,
Tombouctou a complètement
Timbuktu changed completely."
fermé les guillemets.
End of quote.
Le témoin P0638
Witness
que vous avez
P0638,
également entendu dans cette salle,
whom you also heard in this courtroom,
dit en substance la même chose.
essentially said the same thing, Mr. President.
Et le témoin
And witness
P014 qui a également témoigné
P0114, who also testified,
précise que du jour au lendemain, tout est devenu
specified that overnight
haram,
everything had become,
illicite,
and I quote, haram, illicit, and forbidden. End of quote.
on a là, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges,
So, Mr. President, Your Honors, we are dealing here with a
généralisé et
veritable campaign, a widespread and systematic attack against the population, a violation of the fundamental rights and freedoms of the inhabitants on religious and gender-based grounds,
ainsi,
whereby
les femmes doivent se voiler,
women must veil themselves.
la mixité est interdite en ville comme à l'école.
Interaction between the sexes and co-education is prohibited both in the city and at school.
Les écoles non religieuses sont fermées.
Non-religious schools were closed.
La population ne peut plus se recueillir au mausolée des saints musulmans.
The population could no longer gather at the mausoleums of the Muslim saints, which was so
et
dear
dont
to
une
them,
partie est du
and
reste
part of
démolies
which
et rasée jusqu'au sol.
were destroyed and razed to the ground.
Les habitants ne peuvent plus porter d'amulettes ou de talismans.
Inhabitants no longer could wear amulets or talismans
Ni pratiquer
or
certains
even
rites
practice certain customary rituals.
les cérémonies, ainsi que les
Ceremonies,
fêtes et événements culturels
as well as
civils ou
cultural,
religieux,
civil, or religious festivals and events
sont interdits.
were
telle la fête
prohibited,
du Maouloud.
such as the Feast of Maulud.
Les Tombouctiens et les Tombouctiennes
The inhabitants
ne
of
peuvent plus danser ou
Timbuktu
écouter de la musique.
could no longer dance or listen to music.
Les représentations des visages humains sur les peintures ou les
Depictions of human faces on paintings or advertisements were vandalized and erased.
Les hommes et les femmes ne peuvent plus s'habiller comme ils le veulent.
Men and women could no longer dress as they wanted.
L'alcool et les cigarettes sont bannis.
Alcohol and cigarettes were banned.
Regarder la télévision est également interdit.
Watching television was also prohibited.
Les antennes paraboliques sont simplement confisquées.
Satellite dishes were simply confiscated.
En Sardine et à Kimi,
Anne Sardine
dicte aussi
and
la
Akim
manière dont les prières doivent
also
être
dictated how prayers were to be said or conducted in the mosques.
Les cultes, comme le christianisme ou le judaïsme, sont interdits.
Christianity and Judaism were prohibited, among other cults. Shops must remain closed on Fridays.
Les bracelets sont interdits même pour les
Bracelets were forbidden, even for children,
et j'en passe.
and so on and so
On le
forth.
voit,
So you see,
Tombouctiennes
in a
et
nutshell,
Tombouctiens
that
ne peuvent
the
plus
inhabitants of Timbuktu could no longer engage in anything.
C'est que la violation de ces règles est
In fact,
totalement réprimée.
any violation of these rules
Les propos de
was
Gad
followed
Al-Khalil annonçaient.
by very brutal
Les
repression.
complices le revendiquent très
Ayad's
clairement.
words had proclaimed it, and his accomplices clearly endorsed it openly. In an interview of 1 June 2012, Sanda Oud Boumama, whom I referred to previously, stated as follows, and I quote, "I know that hands will be cut off, but we will also cut off heads if the Sharia tells us to do so. So we don't have any complexes about that." End of quote. The use of intimidation and violence became the rule. Arrests, detention, beatings, and other corporal punishments such as flogging. 20 to 40 lashes if a woman were found to be in the company of a man. Al-Hassan, the accused, was an important link in the repressive system that was set up. He himself acknowledges that those sanctions were new. He told ICC investigators the following, and I quote, "The inhabitants did not know these punishments. They are experiencing them for the first time. This is too much for them, but they cannot do anything about it." Everyone feared and was afraid of the word jihadist. They feared punishment. End of quote. That says it all. Well, not indeed, not quite. You see, Ansardine and Hakim did not hesitate to use torture to extract confessions from the inhabitants of Timbuktu who had been arrested on such and such a pretext. On a very quick point of law relating to the enforcement of the new rules and prohibitions, let me briefly say the following. The fact that the members of Ansardine and Hakim themselves respected the rules similar to those they cohesively imposed on the population through threats and violence is not relevant. A finding of persecution does not require perpetrators and victims to operate according to different rules. It requires that perpetrators should seriously deprive victims of their fundamental rights while targeting them on the basis of a discriminatory grounds and identity. That is what is relevant when it comes to the use of threats and violence, which is a common denominator in the action and violence of Hakim and Ansardine over this 10-month period. The fact is that Ansardine and Hakim were over-equipped and made it a point of honor to show it off. They paraded around the town every day in their pickup trucks. They displayed their weapons of war. They displayed their cartridges slung over their shoulders. One witness pointed out before this court, Your Honors, and I quote, that the ruined city was handed over to the exactions of the Islamic nebula. Timbuktu has been won over by fear, to which have been added misery and precariousness. Witness P0654, whom you heard, also confirmed that panic had spread through the population. Fear is the leitmotiv. Fear generated by the occupation forces, Ansardi and Hakim, as a means of control and power to impose their vision. So, concretely speaking, during the first week of April, it was Abu Talha of the Al Furqan battalion, one of the visible armed wings of Ansar Din and Hakim in Timbuktu, who were imposing the new rules. They surrounded and mapped out the city with their men, in line with Iyad's words, which right from the beginning of the occupation was to implement and persecute the population on religious and sexist grounds. Abu Talha and Abu Dar and others provide us the first examples of the same as reflected in the media. And you can see destructions as we are seeing in a video from France too. Statues were broken, and there also we have a video in the case file. Cigarettes were burned, and there are several videos to illustrate this point. Women were forced to cover themselves, and at the same time, other elements of Ansardi and Hakim were carrying out the first damage on the Sidi Mahmoud Cemetery Mausoleum to the northeast of the town and on the Al Farouk monuments in the city center. At the same time, others also were engaged in the systematic looting of public property. This is precisely where we find, Your Honors, the accused Al-Hassan. He joined Ansar Din and Hakim as early as April 2012, after the city was captured. He wasted no time and worked precisely for Abu Talha. And this emerges from several pieces of evidence, including an interview with Al-Hassan himself at the time, as well as testimony from 4 witnesses. On 5 October 2012, Al-Hassan granted an interview. Around noon, he was inside the governorate. He was holding a walkie-talkie in his hands, and he looked perfectly relaxed. And the interview was recorded. What did he say? What did the accused say at that time? He evoked or talked about the beginning of the occupation, saying, and I quote, "If you had come during the first or early days, we only slept an hour or 2 per night. And for the cars, we would fill them up with fuel in the morning, and by evening, the tanks would already be empty." End of quote. I will now show you an excerpt without translation of what I have just said to the court. Al-Hassan is speaking in Arabic, and that corresponds to document number 4 of Mali.
لا ساعة ساعتين في الليل. لا سيارتنا تعبي سيارة تعبيها وقود من الصباح في الليل تلقاها فارغة.
C'est donc très clair.
So it's perfectly clear. Al-Hassan joined the Ansar Dine Akim coalition from the very first days, as he says himself. So let's turn our attention now to the four witnesses that I referred to. These are D0544, a defense witness, and three prosecution witnesses, including P0638 and P1086. So first of all, D0544, who was called by the defense. He knows Al-Hassan well, very well. Approximately 2 weeks after Ansar Dine and Hakim arrived, D0544 saw Al-Hassan in Timbuktu, commanding armed individuals who were looting. Secondly, a prosecution witness corroborated what D0544 had said. This witness also knows Al-Hassan very well. He saw him in the course of the last week of April 2012 at the Malian Solidarity Bank, working for Abu Talha. Now, this witness specifies that Talha at that time was relying on Al-Hassan to identify property, public property, to be looted. And I would remind you that the defense would have you believe that Ansar Dine and Hakim put an end to looting in town, but the facts belie that. Thirdly, witness P0638 also knows Al-Hassan well, and he saw him at the Malian Solidarity Bank in April 2012. And in passing, I can state that P0638 is perfectly credible on this point, as he is on the rest. And D0245, with whom he did not live, had no reason to know exactly what P0638 was or was not doing at that time. Let me give you a brief reference. T210 in the French version, page 27, line 22 to 24. So that's T210. Finally, I will move on to my fourth witness on this point, and that's P1086. Now, he too knew Al-Hassan, and he saw Al-Hassan in front of a building that meets the description of the BMS, that is to say the bank, in April 2012. Now, the Malian Solidarity Bank, the BMS, is located in the Bajinje neighborhood. At that time, it had become one of the new centers of power of the occupying groups, Ansar Dine and Hakim. At that point in time, in April 2012, it was Abu Talha's headquarters. There was an office there. But the BMS also very rapidly became the HQ of the brand new Islamic police. Indeed, Ansar Dine and Hakim very rapidly set up organs tasked with helping them impose their ideological and religious vision by force. And let's be clear on it, also helped them to persecute the inhabitants, and women were targeted in particular. At the top, they installed the presidency, a kind of triumvirate, with Abu Zaid, who was the governor, appointed by Iyad, Yahya Abu al-Hammam, and Abdallah al-Changeti. The latter was a preacher known to Hakim and who was part of the Al-Furqan battalion, command of which he would take on in the course of 2012. Importantly, Ansar Deen and Hakim set up a media office, an Islamic court, a morality brigade, or Hezbollah, and of course an Islamic police force, all working together in a coordinated fashion. So, Your Honours, allow me to now home in on this Islamic police. It was set up at the end of April, beginning of May 2012. From May to August 2012, it moved into the BMS, premises which it shared with Abu Talya. Notably, it had detention cells there. Then, after Ramadan, towards mid-August 2012, the Islamic police moved to the governmental quarter, and more specifically to the governorate. Now, as everyone knows, the governorate is the most imposing administrative building in the town, and that says much about the importance of the police. Of course, the defense would have us believe that the police was a kind of secondary organ, but in fact, everything in the case file proves the contrary. The Islamic police was certainly one of the main organs of repression in Timbuktu. It was 40 men strong in the city. They could be easily recognized by their blue vests emblazoned with the words Islamic Police in French and in Arabic. They were armed with Kalashnikovs. The Islamic police were everywhere. They patrolled by day and by night, by car, by motorbike, and on foot. I'm now going to show you an image that you've already seen, but which illustrates well the nature of these patrols. You see it's a screen. It is an image taken from a screen, and you see two policemen standing with the Hakim flag. The men are standing in a pickup truck. They're wearing their vests. And the policeman on the left quite clearly has a Kalashnikov on his chest. So this is a screenshot taken from document 36 on our list. Now we see these two individuals are wearing the Islamic police vests, as I said before, and they are circulating in town with combat weapons. And that amidst a civilian population. The fact of the matter is that the police would hunt down all those who broke the new rules. These rules sanctioned what was acceptable and prohibited what was unacceptable. It was Al-Hassan himself who told the investigators of the Office of the Prosecutor the following, and I quote, "Sanctioning that which is acceptable and prohibiting that which is unacceptable," he says, "is the work of everyone." End of quotation. A woman who spoke to a man, or simply wearing amulets, smoking a cigarette, practicing magic, relationships outside of wedlock, etc., all now place the people at risk of reprisals and brutality. So, the Islamic police would circulate in the city and apprehend inhabitants who broke these new taboos. The Islamic police would imprison them, and they would torture them to elicit confessions. The Islamic police would write reports on their investigations. The Islamic police would administer punishments called tazir on their own initiative. Witness P0582, who was from the police, very clearly said that tazir, or petty sharia as he called it, were administered in the courtyard of the police station in, and I quote, in the presence of those in charge of the police, Khaled and Al-Hassan. End of quotation.
Ça à 0062-3872-R02, ligne 234-238. Pour sa part, Al-Hassan a déclaré que des
and you will find that on 0062 3872 R02 line 234-238. Now for his part, Al-Hassan stated that the tazir, a tazir of 10 to 20 lashes, was commonplace at the police. That's a quotation, commonplace at the police. Al-Hassan specified that Abu Zaid had compiled a list, and I would quote, it's written on it, for example, that the adjacent smoker, immediately adjacent, 10 lashes. End of quotation. Or, in cases where the police did not met out the punishment itself, it would turn the persons over to the Islamic court, which repeatedly breached even the most fundamental procedural rights. Then the Islamic police would administer the punishments imposed by the court in public with plenty of publicity to frighten the people of Timbuktu. The aim was to denigrate and subjugate. So it is well understood that the Islamic police had a major role in the persecution that the city endured. And as was often the case, we see Al-Hassan at work. Now, the chamber will recall this video where we saw Al-Hassan whipping two men who had drunk alcohol. It was the 8th of July 2012. It was at the market near the BMS building. Al-Hassan was wearing military camouflage trousers. And witness P0653, who is an expert in facial identification, confirmed to a high degree of confidence that the person on the video was indeed Al-Hassan. We see Al-Hassan surrounded by members of the Islamic police wearing their vests and toting their weapons. He has a whip in his hand as well as the keys to the handcuffs that are on the two victims. I think we can all draw the obvious conclusions when it comes to leadership here. The two somewhat distraught victims do not seem to apprehend what's happening to them. No conviction is read out, so this is manifestly a case of tazir, arbitrarily proclaimed by the police. Al-Hassan and his acolyte Abu Dar in turn give, or rather I should say, hail down 40 lashes on each of their two torture victims. And those two victims rise in pain. This is item 6 on our list.
voir Al-Hassan qui frappe cette personne.
And here you can see Al-Hassan, who is beating the person.
Les images parlent d'elles-mêmes sur la violence exercée par Al-Hassan.
I think that the images say all that need to be said regarding the perpetration of violence by Al-Hassan on that individual.
Pour mémoire, je rappelle qu'un témoin de l'accusation a expliqué
I would also remind you that a prosecution witness explained that for members of Ansar Din and Akim, taking part in these punishments would yield a religious benefit to them, and they were proud of it.
C'est cela, Tombouctou en 2012.
So that was life in Timbuktu in 2012. Daily violence
Fondée sur la volonté de contrôle d'Ansar Din et d'Aqmi,
based on Ansar Din and Akim's determination to control and based on their ideological and religious vision.
toutes les populations étaient terrées dans leurs maisons,
Including as regards women.
de peur d'être réprimées,
A local dignitary stressed that, and I quote, "Everyone is holed up in their house
de peur d'être humiliées,
out of fear of being reprimanded, fear of being humiliated,
de peur d'être brutalisées,
fear of being beaten,
de peur d'être violentées.
fear of being assaulted."
Avec cet extrait vidéo, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges, je me suis laissé entraîner.
Now, this video clip, Your Honours, has
au mois de juillet 2012.
taken me a little bit too rapidly to July 2012. So, if I might, I would like to return back to events as they occurred chronologically, if you will.
Je disais donc qu'en avril 2012, Al-Hassan travaille avec Abu Talha.
So I was telling you that in April 2012, Al-Hassan was working with Abu Talha. But at the end of April, or early May 2012, so basically when the Islamic Police was created, Al-Hassan joined
Il devient
the Islamic Police,
omniprésent.
and very rapidly he became omnipresent and indispensable within the Islamic Police.
La preuve est abondante.
There is plenty of evidence of this.
Des témoignages,
Telephone data,
des rapports de police,
witness
des
statements,
notes personnelles,
police reports,
des rapports de
personal
police
notes,
qui représentent
crisis committee reports,
des vidéos,
committees representing inhabitants of the city, but also videos and expert reports.
les données téléphoniques montrent des contacts réguliers dès le
The
30
the telephone data shows regular contacts between Al-Hassan
émir de la police.
Al-Hassan and Adama, who was the first emir of the Islamic Police, and that starting about the 30th of April 2012.
0641
Witness
indique pour
P0641,
sa part très clairement
for his part, clearly
qu'Al-Hassan était
stated
actif dans les premiers
that
jours de la mise en place de
Al-Hassan
la police
was
islamique à la
active in the early days when the Islamic Police was being set up at the BMS.
On a aussi deux documents trouvés à
We
l'hôtel
also
La
have two
Maison par le
documents
témoin P.
which
0007.
were found at the La Maison Hotel by witness P0007.
Ces deux documents prouvent qu'Al-Hassan
Now, these two documents prove that Al-Hassan
plus tard
was a member of the Islamic Police at the latest by the 7th of May
Premier
2012.
porte sur la
The
mort
first
d'une femme
document
enceinte
concerns
sur qui des
the
gens
death
mettaient des cœurs.
of a pregnant woman at whom people had thrown stones.
Il porte le
It's a
stamp de la
handwritten
police
document and it bears the stamp of the
Al-Hassan a
Islamic
admis que
Police.
c'était son écriture,
Al-Hassan has admitted that it is his writing.
et au dos, on voit que cette
And on the
affaire est
back of the
renvoyée
document, we
au
see
tribunal
that
islamique.
the case was referred to the Islamic court.
Le second document est justement le registre du tribunal.
And the second document is the register of the court
Une
itself.
page de ce registre
A page of the register refers to the case of the murder of a pregnant woman,
La page d'à côté porte la date du 7 mai.
and the adjacent page is dated 7th of May 2012.
Par ailleurs, le témoin
Furthermore,
P
witness
0114
P0114
a vu Alassane le 19 mai 2012 à la
saw
BMS.
Al-Hassan on the 19th of May 2012 at the BMS.
Alassane était alors en train d'interroger un individu.
At the time, Al-Hassan was
P114 précise que
questioning an
Alassane
individual,
ordonné à un
and
policier de
P0114
lever l'individu en question et de l'enfermer.
states that he then ordered a policeman to handcuff the person being interviewed and to lock him up.
Il n'y a aucun doute que l'accusé a
There
rejoint
is
le
no
police
doubt
islamique dès ses débuts.
that the accused joined the Islamic Peace
Deux
Police
autres exemples
right
de juin
from the
2012
offset.
illustrent encore si besoin était.
Two other examples from June 2012 demonstrate this also.
Une vidéo filmée vers le 11 juin
If the
2012
rest of the evidence were not
montre
enough.
Alassane dans un bureau
A
de
video
la BMS.
recorded on the 11th of June 2012 shows Al-Hassan in the office of the BMS.
Ces lieux,
Now, for those who are familiar with the premises, this is in the northeastern corner of the building.
Alassane règle alors un problème
Al-Hassan
d'armes entre deux
is
individus.
settling an issue regarding weapons between
Il a
two
reconnu que
individuals,
c'était lui à l'écran.
and he has stated that it is him on the screen.
Le témoin P0065
Witness
l'a aussi identifié.
P0065 has also identified him.
Alassane apparaît clairement dans une position
Al-Hassan clearly appears
Le
to be in a
P0065
position of authority.
capture d'écran.
I'm just going to show you a screenshot of that.
Correspond à l'item 82 de notre liste.
And this is taken from item 82 on our list.
Et vous voyez Alassane dans le bureau de la BMS,
So you see
mène la
Al-Hassan
discussion.
in an office at the BMS
Les armes
who is
dont je parlais sont sur la table.
leading a discussion, and the weapons in question are on the
Et il
table
dispose
just in front of him.
d'un talkie-walkie.
And as we see, he has a walkie-talkie
Le reste de ses activités, il est sur la table à droite.
for his other business. It's there to his, or it's on the table to the right.
Et puis, en juin 2012, il y a la flagellation
And then in
publicitaire
June 2012, we have a flogging for adultery, which took place
qui est le
on the
premier
20th of
exemple
June
d'exécution
of that
publique
year.
d'une
This
peine
is
de houdoud prononcée par le
was
tribunal.
was the first example of the public
L'homme et la
administration
femme
of a
reçoivent chacun
hudud
100
punishment imposed by the court. A man and a woman each receive 100
humiliés devant tout le monde.
lashes. They are lashed and humiliated in front of
Et par
everyone.
force, se cherchent
Ansar
particulièrement
ad-Din and
à intimider la
Akim
population.
are showing their force and seeking to intimidate the population by means of this punishment. And they got a lot of media attention based on this film. It was circulated
On
on
retrouve cette,
widely on social media,
incident dans un reportage sur la chaîne télévisée France 2.
and it was also broadcast on a report
Et je vais vous
on
montrer
the television channel
Français
France
une capture
2.
d'écran qui illustre
Now I'm going to
le
show you
dispositif de sécurité mis en
a
place par
screenshot
Hassan
which
Diakhi.
shows you
à ce
the
moment-là.
security arrangements put in place by Ansar Din and Akim at that time.
Et ça correspond au document 33 de
And this relates to item 33 on the list.
On voit
So here we
Ansar Din
see
et Akmi n'hésitent pas à sécuriser la
that
place
Ansar
encadrée
Din and
de
Akim
la peine exécutée avec des lourdes armes de guerre
use heavy
placées sur des pick-up.
combat arms mounted on pickup trucks to secure
C'est ça,
the area where the punishment is taking
les
place.
habitants au quotidien.
And this is what
Que cela ne
the
leur
people
arrive
of
pas.
Timbuktu would see on a regular
Lors de cet
basis.
événement,
And of course, it was most worrying to them.
on voit Alassane à plusieurs reprises.
Now, during this event, we see Al-Hassan several times.
Notamment au début, il lève la main car il ne veut
In
pas
particular,
être
at the beginning, he raises his arm because he does not want to be filmed. And of course, We now understand why.
Et voici une capture d'écran
And here's a screenshot
tirée du même reportage de la
taken
chaîne
from
France 2.
the same France 2 report showing that.
On le voit avec la veste de la police islamique
You see him wearing the Islamic police
et
vest
la main levée.
and his arm raised.
Puis, Al-Hassan est tout près des victimes quand elles reçoivent les coups en gémissant.
And then we have the fact that Al-Hassan is right beside victims who are receiving lashes and howling in pain. I'm going to show you an extract from that report. It's quite short,
Mais qui illustre les choses.
but it illustrates what was happening.
Ne l'écoute pas, continue.
Stop, stop.
Et vous voyez
And as you see
que sur la vidéo,
on the video,
Al-Hassan est là, tenant un téléphone,
Al-Hassan is there
tout près de la victime,
with a telephone in his hand,
qui est en train de demander
close
qu'on arrête.
to the victim, who's calling out for pity
Très clair,
and
il fait partie du
asking for the flogging to stop.
en train d'essuyer
So
les
it's very clear that he's part of the Islamic police contingent which is administering that punishment.
Il permet de retirer.
If I might, I'd just like to remove that video now.
La réalité, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges,
Your Honours,
c'est qu'Al-Hassan a un
the
rôle
reality
central
is
dans la
that Al-Hassan had a central role
Certes, il
in
ne
the
fait pas
Islamic
tout.
police. Of
Il
course,
y a Adama,
he
le
didn't
premier
do
chef de
everything.
police islamique de mai 2012 jusque vers juin-juillet.
Adama was the first chief of police from May 2012
Puis, il y a
to
Khaled,
July or
le
August
second chef de la police
2012.
islamique
And then there was Khaled,
juillet
the second
2012
chief of
jusqu'à
police,
décembre 2012.
who was in that role from around December
Il
2012.
y a aussi le dénommé Abu Dar, qui
Or,
sont chapeautés des
sorry,
policiers
the
islamiques
interpreter
de
corrects,
Damas.
until about December 2012. And there was also the person called Abu Dahar, who seems to have overseen the Islamic police who were of Bambara
C'est un
ethnicity.
personnage clé, la
But
police.
all of the evidence shows that Al-Hassan was
Il est du
a
reste
key
décrit par de
individual
nombreux
in the
témoins
Islamic
comme
police.
l'adjoint
He's described by
du chef de la police.
many witnesses as being the deputy
Je fais
chief
par
of
exemple
police.
référence
Here I would refer to P4,
P99
P99,
à P114
P114, and by analogy, P0582.
Certains témoins appelés par la défense elle-même
Some witnesses called by the defense itself
du chef de la police.
stated that Al-Hassan was the deputy chief of
D004.
police, and here I would refer to D0093.
En fait, Al-Hassan est le pilier permanent de la police.
In fact, Al-Hassan was a
Et c'est lui
permanent
qui sera
pillar
toujours là
of the
de mai
police
2012
force.
à janvier 2013.
It is he who was always there from May 2012 through to January
Il
2013,
est celui qui assure le fonctionnement
irrespective
et la continuité de la police au quotidien.
of who was chief of police.
Et
It was
ce,
him
à
who
la fois
ensured
sur le plan du fonctionnement
operations and continuity
interne, en
of the police
évaluant
on a
par
day-to-day
exemple
basis.
les nouvelles recrues comme P582,
He was involved in internal operations, for instance, evaluating
mais aussi
new recruits such as P0582, but also he was involved in maintaining
et
order
surtout,
in the streets.
s'agissant de réprimer les violations du
And
code.
above all, when it came to punishing
Il faut bien dire,
violations
Mesdames et Messieurs,
of the
il
new
est un des
rules.
rares au sein de la police islamique
Your
à
Honours,
connaître la ville et ses
he
habitants.
was one of the few within the Islamic police who knew the
Donc voilà, Monsieur le
city
Président, je pense que
very well
ça sera
and
le bon
also
moment
spoke
pour,
the local languages. Now, Your Honours, I'm thinking that perhaps now would be a good time to take
reprendra après si,
the
la
break,
Chambre le veut bien.
and I would be happy to take that break here if the Chamber wishes.
Vous avez parfaitement raison, Monsieur Duterte.
Presiding Judge. You're quite right, Mr. Duterte. The Chamber thanks you
Comme d'habitude,
for your very clear
nous allons
presentation.
nous interrompre pour notre pause,
We shall now take the break.
mais principe, la pause de 30 minutes
Generally, we take a 30-minute break,
va prendre en 45 minutes.
but today we're going to take a 45-minute break, and therefore we shall resume at 11:45. And this is at the request of the Office of the Prosecutor. The Deputy Prosecutor has an appointment, needs to receive a foreign delegation during the break, and therefore we shall resume at 11:45.